So welcome everyone. It's great to be our first session with some live people in person and just kind of look around and kind of take it in. It's been a couple of years for us all, and hi to everybody out there and on Zoom as well. It's great that we can come together in this way. I hope you can kind of see the group. Yeah. The camera there. Yeah, so this is, I'm very happy. It's probably a good time to start a series of talks on happiness. I'm actually pretty happy right now. Yeah. So we are starting a new, this could go on for some time, a series, I guess we could call it, on discovering happiness. And I'm going to come at it from a variety of angles and perspectives. I mean, we all kind of know that, or at least you've heard me say it, that our innate nature is that of peace and happiness. That's our true nature. But I'm not going to just go on like that, like I have been probably for the last year. It's just, really what I've been going on for the last year is inviting people to just tune into that true nature. But of course, the Buddha talked at so many other levels in terms of the way he taught. And so I'm going to take that kind of approach to the teaching. And so we're going to explore it from all kinds of different angles. We're going to look at seeing and knowing the causes of unhappiness. So that's one way to look at it. How believing our thoughts can create unhappiness. Just all the different ways that we create suffering for ourselves. So we're really going to unravel that. And also the failed methods that we use to find happiness. Because we often sort of bark up the wrong tree, so to speak, in trying to think that, we're trying to find happiness. And in fact, it's often causing more suffering. We're going to explore a whole bunch of the different teachings of the Buddha that have to do with happiness, his hierarchy of pleasures, and various different lists that the Buddha taught. I'm going to bring in some of Anthony de Mello's teachings as well, which is from a Christian mystic perspective. He's got some really interesting talks on happiness as well that I've been listening to recently, and have kind of moved me into thinking of different ways that I could also teach this. Looking at ways to relate to emotions, to anxiety, to our traumas, which we all have. And sorrows, which we've all faced. How to relate to these in a way that's conducive to building and discovering happiness. We're going to look at a bunch of happiness practices, ways to live happiness, as well as, and I can't leave this, how to touch into our true nature, which is happiness and peace. It is our deepest nature. And also how to touch into the deepest nature of everybody else, because it's not just your true nature, it's the true nature of every being, and in fact, everything on this planet and beyond. The poet, T.S. Eliot, for me, it touches on happiness. Maybe it won't for you, but he touches on this notion that happiness is already present within us. And the poem goes, "And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Just 3 sentences, I'll say it again. It's, "In the end of all our exploring, we will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Of course, he's pointing to this we're constantly searching for happiness. And at some point we realize it's right here where I started. And then once we see this and know this deeply, it's as if we've seen that depth of ourselves. We've seen ourselves for the first time. It's something you didn't even know was there, hiding like a diamond in your pocket, or and so you know it. You know yourself for the first time, and you know for the first time that you are the happiness that you were seeking. It's actually accessible right there at any time. So all beings want to be happy, right? That seems to be pretty much what motivates us all. Say was be happy. The Dalai Lama often says that all beings just want to live happy lives. I think he's equated happiness is the highest form of health. It's a quote of his. So he often talks about happiness in this way, and that everything we do, if we dig down a little bit, it's directed at attaining happiness. It may not seem like it when you're doing it, but if you kind of look, well, okay, why am I doing that? Because I think it's going to bring me happiness. Why do I want a Tesla? just something that keeps coming up in my mind. I see one go by and I go, wow, that's a cool car. I like the idea of a car that's just got an iPad. But I think it'll bring me happiness, right? And I even know I've had lots of cars, and I wash them every week for a couple of months, and then it's just a car, right? It gets me from A to B. So everything we're doing is kind of has this ultimate goal in it, is to bring happiness. We might try to find happiness in some kind of momentary pleasures, like food, drugs, alcohol, shopping, hooking up. Some distraction that we've found brings us some pleasure. We may think that we'll find happiness if we get a better job, or we have the perfect relationship, or the right house. Whatever it might be, we're just constantly looking for these things. So why do we desire these things? And why do we indulge in these things? Because we think they're going to make us happy. Basically. It's our top desire. And I think it's really kind of the driving force in our lives and in humanity. It's this desire for happiness. So how do we actually find happiness? And that's what we're really going to kind of unravel. How do we find happiness, and how do we cause unhappiness in our lives? So I'll touch on that a little bit without getting into too much detail on it. We kind of go on this journey, and I want to just kind of play around with T.S. Eliot's pose. We kind of start, we've got all kind of different age groups here, and I think it kind of goes through as we go through the decades of our lives. We often, in my case, it did. I started looking for happiness in outside conditions. Right? I'm going to get a university degree. That'll make me happy. Make my parents happy, at least. And then you get the right job. Well, I'll be happy if I get a job. And then the house thing, right? Like my kids are just going through that, wanting a house. So I'll be happy when I get that house. And then the next. So it tends to be this exploration of searching in the material world, in external circumstances. And if we want to get those external circumstances just so that we'll find happiness. And you get to a certain point where you kind of go, really, it doesn't seem to, no matter how I adjust the external circumstances, it doesn't seem to really affect my happiness all that much. There's been research about as soon as you get your basic needs met, beyond that, you're not getting any happiness out of a lot of extra income beyond your kind of basic needs. So we find moments of happiness, but then we find that unhappiness, dissatisfaction just seems to come back again. Have you noticed this in your lives as well, that this is kind of how it plays out? And then once we realize that external circumstances aren't the ticket, then what do we start to look for at? Start to look at spirituality. Maybe there's something beyond the material where I can find happiness. We start, exploring different, well, it could be spiritual or philosophical ideas to see if we can uncover something there. So we may want to find God, or we want to find our Buddha nature, or we want to find enlightenment or awakening. I think that this is the search goes there. We try to change our internal state. Right? Changing the external hasn't brought lasting happiness. So if I change the internal state, that'll bring lasting happiness. But if we look closely at this, we're simply seeking happiness again. We're seeking enlightenment or God with the idea that our difficulties will vanish in the face of this new wisdom that we will attain. So it can be another kind of seeking and grasping that we're doing. So part of the message over these next weeks will be that, if we think of happiness as kind of a status that we need to attain by doing all these things, then we're setting ourselves up for more unhappiness. It just doesn't work. It's one rabbit hole after another in a way. Instead, kind of think of happiness as a way of to engage in the flow of life. Happiness as a way to live and relate to life as it's kind of unfolding. In the guided meditation, I talked about allowing, even embracing whatever's unfolding moment to moment in your life. So this doesn't mean we become doormats or passive or we're resigned to terrible things in the world or in our lives, but it allows us to respond from with wisdom in new ways, which I'll talk about much more. But the first kind of step is engaging in life in the flow of life in a new way. So the Buddha talked about happiness a lot. He used the word sukha, which translates as happiness. It's the opposite of dukkha. You want sukha, you don't want. It's kind of dukkha translates as suffering or unsatisfactoriness, or you could say unhappiness. And sukha is the opposite, translates to happiness or joy or bliss in Pali, which is the language the Buddha used when he delivered his talks 2,600 years ago. And sukha, in the Buddhist text, sukha is also set up in contrast to praya. Praya is transitory happiness, where sukha is a kind of authentic, lasting happiness. So that's really what we'll be exploring is sukha. And I kind of thought this would be cool because I was kind of looking, I've been doing talk, I've got almost 500 talks, I realized I went through them and I thought, I talk a lot about dukkha. And the Buddha gets a bad rap because, life is suffering. And there's all this stuff. So I thought, I'm going to kind of come at it from, life can be happiness. So we're going to talk about sukha all the time instead of dukkha. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that in insight meditation circles, but we're going to do it anyway. we're going to talk about sukha and really move forward with that. Now, the Buddha, in the way he taught, it's really interesting as you look at the texts on sukha. He was really, really careful not to objectify it as a state of mind. He was always very strategic and careful in that, because you don't want to, give people the idea that it's something they need to seek and construct. He was very careful not to make it objectify it in this way. He often referred to it as the cessation of dukkha. The Four Noble Truths is probably his most famous talk. Four Noble Truths, or the Four Ennobling Truths, as it's sometimes called. It's one of the few talks that every Buddhist lineage and tradition actually has as a core text, whether it's Theravada, Mahayana, or Vajrayana. It refers to it the cessation of dukkha, which really translates as sukha. It's the arising of happiness, of sukha. So how do we, I've talked a bit about how we seek happiness. How do we, how do we think happiness arises in our lives? We often think it's an internal experience, right? We get that, and we often think that it's triggered by some from the outside in some way. It has to be triggered in some way. And but for this to happen, happiness has to be a potential that's within us all. If we think of it as something that's triggered, it's already and always present. So if this is so, then we should be able to access it any time. Anytime. In fact, if I go back to what the impetus for this series was, back in the week, I was just sitting in the house, and a sense of boredom arose, and just this kind of deep sense of a voice. Really, it was the mind saying, "You're bored." And you better do something, or you're going to be miserable. There's, just turn the TV on, or get a book, or do something, eat something. I eat mixed nuts. I'm like that. That's what I go to. Eat some mixed nuts, watch TV, or read a book, right? Or go for a walk. That's another one. You better do something, or you're going to be bored. And I just kind of paused, and actually I stopped. I thought, oh, I don't have to believe this. I don't have to listen to the mind. I don't have to believe these thoughts. And instead I stopped, and I sensed into a deeper dimension of myself. And what I discovered is there's this happiness that's there that I could just touch. Just move. I didn't need to run around and change the external circumstances. I didn't even need to meditate to try to cultivate a positive state, which is another go-to. I can think back in history, that would be a go-to. I'm feeling miserable, I'll meditate, and I'll cope. All these, may I be lovely, and I would cultivate that beautiful state of loving kindness. I didn't even need to do that. I could just touch into then and there what was already present, this deep state of happiness. So that was really kind of what precipitated this whole this series. So this potential is always present. It's always here. So you should be able to access it at any time. You don't need any particular circumstances or practice to access it. Now, if you could access happiness at any time, without changing anything, your circumstances or your internal state. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be a kind of the ultimate discovery? Some kind of anxiety arises and you just go a little deeper and access something that's there. It's your birthright. That's your nature, your true nature, without the need to do anything. Wouldn't that be kind of wow? Amazing. I call it the ultimate discovery. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't seek pleasurable things, pleasurable conditions and experiences for ourselves. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't cultivate positive states of mind. The Buddha had 4 Brahma Viharas, which were directed at cultivating loving kindness, sympathetic joy, equanimity, so compassion. Thank you. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. So I'm not saying we don't buy the Tesla or do loving kindness. I'm not saying that at all. These are fine as far as they get us. As far as they get us. But we can also know the limitations of those activities. We can also know the limitations. They can incline the mind in a certain way, which can feel pleasurable, and we just feel happy. And then we can get momentary happiness from external circumstances. There's nothing wrong with that. It's how we relate to it, really that we need to explore and examine how we relate to those pleasures. I did 6 weeks at a tantric ashram, and we spent the whole 6 weeks exploring how we relate to pleasure. There was no sex involved at this ashram. It was chocolate cake and jubes and things like that. But we were exploring how we related to pleasure, and to do so skillfully in a way that it doesn't cause suffering when it ends. It was a very interesting exploration to do for that length of time. And the other thing the Buddha often talked about was how we struggle with life. How we grasp at what we want, we push away what we don't want. The shorthand I use for that is we struggle. We're not okay with what is, so we try to change it. We're constantly in a kind of struggle with what is. So we create unhappiness when we do that. I mean, that's the crux of the Four Noble Truths, right? Cause of dukkha is clinging, which is grasping and pushing away. Cessation is when you no longer do that. The struggling, and the way I kind of look at it is the struggling obscures our natural innate happiness. So when the boredom arose, the egoic mind piped in and said, you got to do something or you're going to be miserable. That was setting up a struggle with what is. Boredom arose. That's what is. So it obscured. If I had listened and followed that path, I would have suffered. Dukkha would have arose. So if those thoughts are believed, it really obscures that natural, innate, essential nature of happiness. When they're just allowed, those kinds of thoughts are just allowed to be and not followed, happiness can and your true nature can shine through. So to touch into the lasting happiness is simply to go behind the obscuring clouds of egoic thought and emotions, going behind that. And then we get to the source, right? The source of our being, or the deepest dimension of our being. So I'll end by coming back around to T.S. Eliot in that quote. It really strikes me as something that's within all cultures and all spiritual traditions have stories like that, where, you know, people tirelessly seek happiness in outward objects and relationships and activities, and also inwardly in states of mind, only to find that it's already here and it's the deepest nature of our being. That story gets repeated in so many different ways in different spiritual traditions and in different cultures. And it's like, you know, I think it's a Buddhist story. It might be some other spiritual traditions that start to get mixed up in my head sometimes, about the person who goes they're poor and they're going to look for wealth in the world, and they go everywhere looking for wealth and realize they've had a big huge diamond in their pocket all along. They've been wealthy all along. So it's kind of like having that diamond in your pocket and not knowing it's there. We have this innate happiness that's always there and can be touched into. I have to talk practice a little bit. I've got 3 minutes here. 4 minutes on my watch. We'll go with my watch. So you can pay attention to what's going on in this room, right? Or if you're on Zoom, what you observe on the screen and in the room you're in. Right? There's words being spoken, there's people sitting here or a screen in front of you, there's sounds, there's a whole context of things happening. And you can pay attention to that. You can bring your awareness to that. And you can move backwards and you can look and see that there's an awareness behind all that is aware of all this happening. So you can bring your attention to the context of the objects, you could say. That you could bring your attention to the objects, or you could bring it back to the awareness that knows the objects. So it's kind of a backward step, as they say in Zen, to the awareness, and you can kind of move it back and forth. You focus on objects, to focus on that which knows these objects. So that's something to play around with during the week, because it's kind of training your attention to be able to rest in different dimensions. One of the material world, where most people spend all their time. Meditators might spend some time in awareness, particularly when they're meditating. Even during the day, it may not be the place where you abide or rest. So it's just every once in a while, just kind of go back and forth. And there's actually a third, and that's all this stuff going on here, the mind body. Right? There's all the sensations that are happening, and there's thoughts, emotions. So there's all that happening. So there's a third level that you could also tune into, the objects out here, what's happening in the mind body, and then the awareness that knows all of this. Awareness is aware of thoughts. Awareness is aware of body sensations, smiling faces behind masks. I can tell when you're smiling because your eyes change. And it's aware of all of this. And so that's an interesting, just to move between those three levels and to see. And you might notice that the thoughts and feelings are kind of like subtitles in a movie. It's added on to the objects. It's like subtitles. But it's also the means by which you experience the world. It's the only way you can experience the world as a human being is through these senses. And you start to see that, wow, this is really limited. These senses, are they really giving me a complete and accurate picture of the world? I mean, it seems like it's scent. I mean, my dog smells apparently 10,000 times better than I do, so he must have a different version of the world than I do. So all the different species on the planets have different bats. They're using radar. I mean, these are different, all limited ways, but different ways of receiving the appearances, the world. So you start to kind of notice, oh wow, this mind body is really, it's kind of limited in how it. Perhaps there's a world beyond these limited sense perceptions. So I know I've covered a lot, but play around with that practice in particular, just as a way to pay attention in different ways, and kind of think of the three objects in the world. Mind, body is the second one, and then the awareness that's behind. It's kind of the background. Rupert Spear calls it, it's like the movie screen that the show plays on. Awareness is kind of like that movie screen. It's just in the background. You kind of don't even realize it's there because you're enthralled with the images on the screen. How many people think of the screen right when they're watching a movie? It's just all the fun things going on the screen. So it's that kind of background to the movie. Think of it as the screen, if that's helpful. So I'll open it up for some questions, some comments. How are folks doing out in the Zoom there? Hope you can hear me well. You may not be able to hear the participants, but I will repeat as much as I can. Should I try this speaker thing again? It's supposed to have 6 microphones in it. But let me try it one more time.
Just like loving a Tesla.
Yeah. Just like a Tesla. See if I can change the speaker to it. No, it's not even seeing it this time. Oh, there it is. Okay, so now I've got this other speaker. Can you still hear me?
Well, there's less echo, but it's intermittent.
It's choppy, Stephen.
It's choppy, eh? Okay, I'll go back to the laptop. I will try to find a better speaker. Better microphone to pick up things in the room, because right now I'm using the laptop, which is not bad, but we need something to pick everybody else up.
Hardwire? Does that have an option to hardwire it? Because it's Bluetooth, right?
Yeah.
Does it have a...
Yeah, it does have a, I could try hardwiring it next time. Good idea. I'll try that. So it was a suggestion that I hardwire it next time instead of Bluetoothing it. So yeah, any questions? Any questions or comments, folks?
Really liked it. Really enjoyed it very much. My brain is now sitting in happiness is just behind the captions. And I'm finding it really joyful to sit in that little feeling that I have left over from what you were saying, particularly at the end. So I'm looking forward to swimming in that for the next few days. Like maybe a song or something.
So she's saying the feeling that happiness is in the captions,
It's behind. right?
behind the captions. Okay, yeah, behind the captions that are our mind and body is the captions in a movie. Happiness is behind that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is such a beautiful space too. I feel so it's so great here to be with everyone. Speaking about happiness. Well, what's coming up? A couple of things came up for me in that talk.
Can you go folks here, Jason? A little
Can you
bit?
hear me? I can talk loud.
Yes.
All right. So, but first was just the when we were doing the meditation, when we went into the open awareness, and you were talking about that in the practice part. The one thing that I found for me that I do because the open awareness meditation is, it's really powerful. Is I think, okay, it's open awareness. It's kind of like focusing and not focusing on everything and nothing all at the same time. And then your mind's like, oh, I can't understand that. And all of a sudden you're in open awareness. And so I found that helpful. And then I was thinking the other thing you were saying about sukha and dukkha. Sukha, sukha is dukkha, and dukkha is sukha. And they're both the same thing. And that's why you were speaking about, we often go for the outer things to try to make us happy, and then we end up turning inwards. But then the realization comes that it's both and it's neither. And that's when I feel it's like the true happiness. You can say it's both, but it's neither. And it's this sense of wow. And it kind of reminds me, and that's why I think we can't push away any of our experiences, because it all needs to be there. The sukha and the dukkha need to be there. Like it's because of the same thing. And it reminds me of that Zen koan, like a sword that cuts but can't cut its sword that cuts but can't cut itself. Because all there is the sword, right? And everything is the sword. And you can't cut out the sword. There's only the sword. And the sword is this whole thing, and it can never cut itself. It's already perfect, just like it is. And so I really, really valued that talk. I think it was excellent, and the T.S. Eliot poem was wonderful too. So thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
I just want to comment and bear with me because I'm really bad at nothing proofs, but I want to comment on how eerie it is that the universe has decided this is what we're paying attention to now because I'm living exactly what you were talking about. So I just got a promotion and I'm riding the wave and experiencing the happiness that literally, as Karen and I are working over here this evening, I was saying to her, I'm really enjoying this feeling, but I wish I could generate it myself. I wish it didn't rely on the outside giving me these things because the universe isn't interested in catering to my preferences. So I wish I could generate it myself and to come here and hear that that's actually a thing, that I have access to that. It's just a really nice continuation of my thought. And so, yeah, but I found it eerie that that was the topic today. That's on my mind right now. I don't know what to say about that, but the universe is fun.
Yeah, it is weird how the universe does this. Even when I sort of decided in my mind that I was going to do happiness, I pick up a book and it'd be about happiness, or I'd start a conversation with somebody and they'd start talking about happiness and going, is this always happening? I'm just like noticing it now, or this is, and it was kind of a weird, I had that kind of surreal experience of, you know, things all coming together for this to happen in this moment, that all these other things just kind of happened on their own, that I didn't really have to do anything to make them happen. And happiness, as you say, you know, it's accessible anytime. And that's an amazing thing to know that, you know, because we go to a lot of trouble to organize external circumstances. And as I said, doesn't mean you don't go to a nice show or, you know, buy, you know, get flowers and get nice things and so on. It's all about, you know, the attachment or the identification with those things. Of course, that causes the suffering, not the things themselves. But yeah, you can access happiness anytime, whether it be cultivated with as a state of mind with loving kindness meditations or compassion meditations, or whether it be uncultivated, meaning it's already something that's there that we can just touch into. So there's a few ways that we can really experience happiness or know happiness as our true nature. It's kind of both ways to kind of come at it. Yeah, but it's always available, and I figure, you know, touching into my true nature is probably going to be a lot cheaper than a Tesla. We have this thing where we go like this when we're finished talking and when we start, just so yeah. So I meet people.
You know, I just, something just came up with that comment for me, and I mean, I think one thing that becomes makes it difficult for us to dip into that true nature. Like we said, like you talked, this is like a common pattern of like we go for on the outside and on the inside, and then we get TSL writing his poem, and it's basically, you know, there's many different versions of that poem that are written by different people over centuries. There's and we've talked about the separate self and the egoic self. I mean, these are just concepts as ultimately that are mind, so we can actually talk about these things to each other. But the idea that the egoic self and the separate self, they're kind of like, you know, little buddies. And I've been thinking about them lately more like it's like our mind is part of our mind has been cut off from the self. It's like the mind, it's like it has amnesia. The egoic self has amnesia of its true nature. And so it gets scared. And that's part comes into like the clinging and wanting to find different things, whether it's inside or outside, to try to soothe these various fears that we might have. That separate self too, it's like, you know, this idea that we're separate from one another, and this allows us to have experience, but it's real that aspect of the mind is like an amnesia or like a forgetting. It's like part of us forgetting ourselves. It's like us forgetting our true nature, or that our mind forgetting that aspect of us, that our true nature, which is happiness. So I find like that's interesting to think of. It's like our mind having amnesia or forgetting until the point comes where it starts to remember what the true nature is. That's always been there, but it forgot at some point.
It's so hard to talk about, but consciousness forgets itself in order to have the experience of a human being. And the process of waking up is as consciousness then knowing itself as consciousness. If that makes any sense. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. It's a process of discovery. That's why I called it discovering happiness rather than finding, because it really is a process of uncovering, discovering, and unveiling, as opposed to searching and finding.
I really appreciated your talk tonight, the whole thing. But one thing on my mind now is your comment that happiness isn't, I don't remember your words, but happiness isn't a framework that we get into as a way of relating to what we're experiencing at any time. And I was dealing with some problematic reactions on my part to something around me this week and feeling like I really need to work on that, and I'm frustrated that I'm having that type of response to something after many years. And with your comment, I was thinking, you can even just, so I'm searching for happiness, like, okay, when I fix that, I'll be happy. But when I get over that habit, or when I solve whatever that is, then I can be happy. And your comment, I felt was a release, because I was thinking, you know what, I can even just be happy with my own messy, complex, problematic reactions and enjoy that that's part of my human journey right now. Even be at ease with, even as we strive to grow, to be at ease with we are.
Yeah, beautifully put. Yeah. So as you said, it's a way of engaging with the flow of life, as opposed to a state of mind that we need to find and seek. One way to look at happiness and all the messiness that is the human life, right? First noble truth. Translated slightly, this human life is messy. Shit happens. Yeah, you pointed to the first noble truth in that, and if I always say, if we can even grok the first noble truth, life transforms significantly. And never mind the other three. Just grok the first one, that shit happens, and that's what's supposed to happen. It's not supposed to be any other way. And so spending so much time trying to fix ourselves. Anthony DeMello actually has a book called Stop Fixing Yourself. It's actually, as far as books go, it's a good read. I always tell you not to read too many books, but this one's not conceptual. He's very much embedded in what he says. It's not written from a conceptual perspective. So yeah, once we realize that this is just part of being human, then we can really kind of stop fixing ourselves and just rest in our essential nature. Which is happiness. I forgot to do my thing.
I was gonna-
Feel free if anybody in Zoom has any comments or questions to feel free to engage as part of the group like everyone else. Yeah, so
I find is that to the very concept of seeking happiness is not really happiness unless until one realizes that both sukha and dukkha are transitionary, are impermanent. If I seek something, but with the awareness that it is transitionary, it is impermanent, with that sort of detachment, maybe that's the real happiness. But to seek happiness with an object of happiness itself, I find that itself is not really happiness.
yeah, thanks, Om. Everybody heard you. The speaker works fine at this end, so everybody heard what we said. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, as soon as this is the whole paradox, I guess is the word of spiritual seeking. The seeking itself causes suffering because we're trying to fix ourselves or we're trying to change something. I want to be happier. I want this. So the seeking itself creates dukkha. Something that we'll definitely touch on, and no matter what we seek, whether it be enlightenment, so it can be a real barrier, impediment to awakening, the seeking, which it sounds so counterintuitive in a way, right? Or doesn't make sense to the egoic mind. What do you mean seeking makes me so? I mean, that's how I get everything done, right? Your egoic mind will totally resist that notion because it will say, "Oh no, you gotta keep fixing yourself. If you stop, can you imagine the mess that you'll be? You gotta keep seeking stuff because if you don't, everything will fall apart around you." And so the egoic mind will continually tell you that no, seeking is the way, and fixing yourself is the way. So it can be I was going to use the word challenging. It can be a difficult thing to understand because the mind can't understand it. So you're really having to see it over and over again. It's almost like repeat. Oh God, really? Oh, it really is that way. Oh, it really is that way. And finally, even the mind starts to go. Oh, it starts to lessen it's grasping on those thoughts over time. I know I had to see it many times before it was even remotely seen as a truth. to be, had to repeat it many times. Yeah, thank you for that, all. Let me know if anybody does that over there. So I can't see them as well as you can.
I just have a brief comment, Stephen, that what Om just said, it reminded me of that, this kind of Sukha Dukkha thing. It reminded me of this quote by this poet, William Blake, he's English, and the fool who persists in his foolishness shall become wise. But actually the wise is foolish too. So he doesn't add the second part on. It's not actually in the poem, which is the wise person that persists in their wisdom shall become foolish. Because wisdom is foolishness. So it's that duality actually being non-duality. So I find it's helpful if I'm like being really hard on myself. It's like, let's just kind of be foolish right now. And I'm gonna find some wisdom in that.
I just thought I'd share, you mentioned that the timing just seemed right, as soon as you decided to pick up this theme of happiness, you kept encountering, materials that you might incorporate. And I just thought I'd share, I had a hard week last week, and so I decided to listen to a talk by Sharon Salzberg. And so she was talking about someone who had emailed her, and they shared that they had started meditating. But there wasn't really anyone in the community who meditated, so they were looking for some guidance. And she said, her first reaction was like, there are people who meditate everywhere. Just Google insight meditation, Boston. And I thought, well, I know that there's no insight meditation group in Ottawa. Like that's I'm familiar with True North, so I was like, maybe I can start going to Montreal, like just go for their Sunday sits. And but then I thought, take Sharon's advice, Google Insight Meditation Ottawa, and I found your group and I signed for the mailing list. And then you started this week. My first email from you was we're meeting in person again. So I just thought I would share this sense that like sometimes the timing just works out. Yeah.
Is that the word serendipitous? Is that the word for it?
Synchronicity.
Synchronicity. Yeah. How's everybody doing out in Zoom? Okay, well, we're out of time. As you know, we operate on Dana, which is donation, and that little tin over there is the Dana box. And for people online, they e-transfer. You can e-transfer too if you want. But if you have cash, I never carry cash. So I have my little pile. I used to have a pile of money going to a meditation. I got to take some cash, but if you don't, then e-transfer is fine. It's on the website. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I'll always remember this as the first post-pandemic meditation group. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Thanks online.
Thanks,
People.
Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Stephen. Have a good week,
Thanks.
everybody.
Next week. You too. Bye.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Bye.
My pleasure.